All right, let's go April 14th, 2022, planning board meeting report. Any opportunity to do roll call?
Yes, sir, we have.
Awesome. So that brings us to item 3, approval of planning board minutes. Has everybody had opportunity to take it?
So you all have, we've had a couple edits from board members since we sent the agenda out. Y'all have those edits in front of you right now.
Mr. Chairman, I move all these minutes be approved as presented.
Can I take a pause on that real quick? The attendance for the February 10th meeting. I think I saw my name on that one as far as being present. I was not present at that one, so make that correction. I think that was the one that in the courthouse, if I remember correctly.
It was. Mhm.
All right.
Sir, you'd like to amend that motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve these minutes as amended.
Motion got a second.
I'd say.
Got a motion second. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Can we make sure we hear Sandy's vote?
Aye.
She says aye.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Graves.
And even
Hey,
though we didn't
guys.
hear it, we did see it. So.
Yeah. All right, so that brings us to public comments. Mr. Freehold.
Sure.
3 minutes, sir.
All right, thank you. Evening, everybody. Full transparency, I'm Ed Friola. I'm a candidate for state representative. That's not quite the reason I'm here tonight. I just wanted to register opposition to what I understand a change in the meeting procedures by the board to eliminate, it appears, public comment. Don't think that's a good idea. I think that more civic engagement at this time in particular is well warranted. I think that the nature of planning, and I have a little bit of experience, having been a deputy clerk of a legislature in another state and wrote a lot of state legislation with regard to planning, is granular in nature. And I think the granular nature of it requires that civic input come right at the beginning of a process rather than at the end of the process. In so many words, just to sum it up, that's how groupthink fiascos happen with projects by not enough people who disagree at the early stages of negotiation. So I would be opposed to the elimination of the public input portion of your public meeting standards. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Mike Owens.
How y'all doing tonight?
Good, sir. How are you?
I'll be pretty brief, 3 minutes. Hey, I just want to say thank you to everybody up here that's serving. I know it's a thankless job. Anytime you give your time, especially for free, and you subject yourself to comments from the public, it can be stressful at least, and especially if you don't have tough skin like I got. And with that being said, there's some people I want to recognize, not everybody, but just in general comment. To give you an example why public comments make a difference, it's like the very first night I came up here to oppose the proposed zoning, the chairman here, he made me mad right out the gate. When he sat there and spoke like he was on my side, everything he said was like I wanted to hear. And then he voted at a tie to go the other way. And when we got in the car, my wife said, you know, that Ray Cobb, he's got integrity. And I said, what do you mean? She said, his personal feelings was with you, but he knew that the matter this strong needed some more talk, more discussion. And so he went against his own personal beliefs to do the right thing. And so I want to commend Ray for that. And there's other people on the board, like Mr. Poe here. He's reached out to me several times, and y'all know how much heat I put on Mr. Poe. He's actually came to my property after I put the heat on. And I commend you for that. I thank you for that. And he knows I thank him. I thanked him that night that he come to my house. And that's the type of people that we need to serve, like Ray, like Mr. Poe. And I've had other people reach out to me. And we need public comment, but not just because of that, but because like the 130-some people we had at the old courthouse, I done a quick survey. Only 68% of those people had internet. Only 68%. But here's the real kicker. Only less than 50% had emails. You're talking about an older generation. This is a generational thing. They're not, if y'all do away with public comments, say just email us, you're going to just disregard a certain population of people that don't have internet or don't have emails. They're not like my uncle, my daddy, people in their 60s, 70s. They don't do that. So some do, but the majority don't. And so you're going to be silencing people at a critical time. If you're worried about people talking too long and you got too many people, there's a common sense solution. If you got, break it down to segments. If you got more than 20 people, make it 2 minutes. If you got more than 30 people, make it a minute. But give everybody at least some time to talk. And you can just different say, hey, I'm for it, I'm against it. That's all I'm asking. I think you'd be making a grave mistake to do away with public comment. I appreciate y'all letting us do it. I know you don't have to do it, but y'all are supposed to represent the people. I know you don't want 130 people coming to your house to talk to you because they can't come up here and talk to you. I wouldn't. I don't step away for 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Jane Majors.
Jane Majors, Snow County, North Carolina. I guess we all North Carolina, right? Probably didn't need to add that. Y'all probably know where that is. I too am very dismayed at the proposal to eliminate public comments. I agree that a lot of people don't have email. When we were doing the zoning, I sent an email to all but one of the planning board members, and I didn't have that member's email. Spoke in person to one, I got 3 responses. Not even an acknowledgement from the others. So the confidence that you're going to see my email if I have something to complain about or to comment on is kind of low. We know that the United States Postal Service is having issues getting things to where they belong in a timely manner. So I have probably less confidence that my comment might get here if I don't get it sent in a timely manner. I didn't know about what process, how far along this draft had come, because I wasn't able to be here for the March 24th meeting. When I was here for the meeting before that, y'all were just starting to talk about it. And one of your members said, we should not keep people from commenting because if they care enough about a issue, then we should hear them out. I agree with time limits. Can't give somebody 30 minutes to come up here and talk. I agree with everybody needs to be respectful, but I really urge you to reconsider this because I think you're going to get not only a lot of problems with it, but it's just not right. You should be able, we should be able to come up and make our comments known to you, because I'm frankly not very confident that if I send an email to you that you're going to read it. You got a lot to read. How am I going to know that you've read my comment? And so, I really encourage you to keep the parameters in place. 3 minutes. If you get a big issue and there's lots of people here, maybe trim it to 2 minutes. But I think we deserve to be heard face to face to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Max Morgan.
I'm here tonight to share my thoughts on the public speaking policy that's being recommended. This will take away the public's right to speak before you. And it does say we can send in written comments, but a lot of times written comments can be taken differently than a voice comment. And this could lead to some misconceptions. Also, some folks don't have access to a computer or just don't know how to use one very well. We live in a great country where people have the freedom of speech. I feel like doing this would take the right away from the citizens in this county. We, the people, should have say. And I don't believe any one of you would even want this to happen. So I'm really not sure why the idea is being brought up. And why wouldn't we just use the same as the county commissioners uses? Thank y'all tonight and have a good night.
That concludes our sign up list. Anybody else in the room who might have opportunity to sign up like same thing? All right, this time we're gonna close public comments. This time. Any board commission response concerning anything we need to know about?
No, sir.
So there's no new business. I'm assuming that brings us to old business. What do you have?
So we've got a public comment policy. Patrick, Assistant County Attorney, is on by Zoom, and he's going to introduce this for all of us tonight.
Good evening, everybody. What you have in front of you are two different revisions to what we have. The first, beginning on page 35 of the agenda, is the draft public hearing and comment policy that we've put together. This reflects Natalia's presentation and is in line with the state statutes. It allows for the public to voice their concerns and voices through submission to the planning department, either through calls, emails, visits, handwritten notes before the meetings. So public opinion can still be presented, but it is just limited in during the meetings themselves. So, but that does not mean that all public comments are restricted. There may be a time or two when public hearings are required per the statute, and this policy does reflect that. And it just sets out some guidelines that is very similar to the policy that is still in effect today, just about the time limitations and maintaining decorum and order during these public hearings.
Staff does have one note, if the chair wants to hear that.
Sure.
So you've got the public comment policy that Patrick just let you know about. The next pages are what is currently the Alamance County Planning Board bylaws and meeting procedures. And these are recommendations through legal to take out in response to what will be a public comment policy. And the planning boards don't really have bylaws, they only have procedures. That's why that was stricken at the top. Then the next actual ordinance for the planning board, that has been adjusted not based on public comment, but because the general statutes that are referred to in that ordinance have changed. And so 160D actually gives the authority to planning boards. So those changes have been made to reflect that, not so much the public comment side.
Yep, and as Tanya said, the main two differences are the public comment period being adjusted within that ordinance, and then the statutory. As you all know, North Carolina statutes are broken up between counties and cities, but recently in 2019, 2020, the legislature put them together under 160D. So to bring the ordinance up to speed, we just made that quick adjustment while we had the opportunity.
Patrick, is that pretty much what you got for us?
Yes, sir, that is.
This time, maybe the planning board like to discuss the situation.
I think always had at this board since
ability for the public to comment. It was always kind of a little bit of an open thing. Allow anybody to talk. And it was, I think it was right to come up with a procedure. Very similar to the county commissioners. And I agree with that, maybe the time limit thing, or maybe how some of the public comments are approached without, being a negative, being more of a positive to individuals. But I agree that we need to have a public comment period for sure and maintain that.
I agree with you. I mean, if they take their time to come up here, they need to be heard. And whenever we had a situation, that affects people's livelihood, like the zone deal does, or the rock quarry affects a lot of people's livelihood, their issues need to be heard. And I agree. I'm the first one to admit I'm not the best one to read emails. Okay? I mean, it's just not my thing. But if you want to come sit down and talk about it, I'm all for it.
And I'll just piggyback. I think we have a unique opportunity as an advisory board. In order to advise, we have to get all the information we can possibly get. I think unlike the county commission board that has a lot of other agenda items that they have to get through tonight, we don't normally, from looking at past agendas, have lengthy agendas. Granted, there's one-off situations, but even like tonight, I think there's only one item on the agenda. So I think that allows us a unique opportunity to hear from the public. And then just as a quick caveat, right now, I'm sure all of us are following, we service the county residents. And in the county, it is a fact that access to internet is not adequate. That's why there's money being brought in to increase access to internet. And I just believe that until we allow for access to internet, that we should not limit it to just written responses on.
Well, I think it's probably fair for me to say at this point that this discussion in its entirety is probably my fault. Because I'm the one who's more apt to sit here and kind of have an exchange with everybody. And that's what's raised the ire of the legal department. So that we're even having this discussion, let me just abjectly apologize. And I'll try to do better by not engaging in conversation. Well,
Now, too, public comment periods, sitting here, there are items that I have learned from people making public comments. A different perspective allowed me to rethink and discern on some stuff and think about, that's a different perspective that I didn't really think about. So maintaining public comments now, we want to put a time limit on it, because like I said, it did get probably, we were open for it, seemed like before, which was engaging too. It only became probably an issue in the last several months when we had some really hot button items.
it only became an issue when it became an issue.
That's right.
Well, I accept responsibility because I do remember those meetings where the speaker did go on for 3 minutes and I allowed it. On the flip side, Rodney and myself have talked about this a million times about our responsibility as being an advisory board to the commissioners. Another thing is to serve the people. So it's a balancing act, and Rodney has defined that amongst us. It is balancing. We're trying to satisfy the public at the same time, give the commissioner something that can be constructive for them to be able to do their job. So, but on the flip side, part of the balancing act is listening to the public. So that's all I gotta say about that. You guys go ahead on this.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I agree with everything that's been said, and then in hearing such, I would make a motion, we adopt this draft public comment policy here.
Draft 1 or draft 2?
This, which is no number on this one, it just says draft.
And I do remember, I think, The attorney was saying if there were two different versions.
It would be best if we can handle it 1 and 2 each individually. First being the public comment policy, and then second being the ordinance. Right there.
Just two documents with two sets of things.
So Patrick, are we doing the bylaws and procedures in the ordinance as one vote, or we need to treat it like it's 3 votes, public comment policy, and then the bylaws and then the ordinance?
It's a good question because you're right. The meeting procedures do kind of depend on the first vote being the public comment policy because it is the public comment policy that is changing in the procedures in number 2, if we were to say 1, 2, 3. So you are correct. 3 different votes, all depending on one another.
Okay, because that last ordinance, actually, your ordinance goes to county commissioners for final approval. Your procedures and your public comment policy stays here. It doesn't go past this for vote. But your public comment policy as written allows for 3 minutes and people to speak only at public hearings, not as a general public comment in every meeting, is what this policy is.
I don't want that. No, I don't drop
It
that.
takes it back to just written.
I want them to be able to talk if they want to speak. I didn't realize this. was not allowed.
Article 1 doesn't A, that kind of doesn't sound so good. A, comments, procedure, and public hearings. So, yeah, I'm gonna agree.
Yeah, I don't want it to be just public hearings. I want it to be, we have a public comment period at every meeting, yes.
Where it says right here on the draft, public hearing and public comment policy. Item 2 says each person is there to speak during a public hearing has up to 3 minutes to make remarks.
Yeah, but that's not a meeting. That's
Only during public
only
hearing.
during public
You've
hearing.
got a couple different things in the ordinances that require a public hearing, like your solar farm applications, those require public hearing. Those would be the only type meetings that would have any kind of public comment at that meeting. Your general public comment at any meeting would go away if you vote this policy. It would go, I would say go away. It would come to you in writing before the meeting. It would not be at the meeting verbally given to you.
I want it to be that they can speak. If they would like to speak.
Right away.
Can we
need to
amend this? Can we amend this right here?
Well, I think, Patrick, if we did such an amendment, that would be something we kind of discuss here tonight, and then we draft something for them to look at.
That'd be the best procedure because you already have a current policy that kind of reflects what you're discussing. It just needs a facelift to be kind of cleaned up a little bit. And that is something we can definitely work on if the proposed draft tonight does not work and the board decides to vote it down tonight. We can come back next meeting with another draft that fits kind of what we're hearing that the board would like to see.
Mr. Chairman, I think the public needs to be heard. I think they should be allowed to make public comments at our meeting, not just at a public hearing.
I'm not gonna disagree with you.
So my motion would be to do away with this draft completely and send it back to the. Yeah, I withdraw my motion.
Sounds like we're reading through this where it says hearings, public hearings.
I
Should be public meetings.
I didn't quite see
Or,
that.
because our planning board are public meetings.
It sounds like we have two different policies for two different types of meetings / hearings. Is there a way to have one policy
Well,
for both situations?
we're potentially getting ready to. If we vote on this,
Then we would have two different.
then we're gonna have to, what we've done in the past is just have a public comment policy. And if you've got an agenda item, you're gonna talk about cheeseburgers. You wanna come in here and tell us how much you like your onions on your cheeseburgers, that's great. But if you wanna come in here and tell us that you just put a new set of tires on your tractor, when we're talking about cheeseburgers, that's no problem. So I think, based on the conversations that I've heard, the intent from the legal department was what he just said, what Patrick just said was to kind of clean up and maybe put a little finer point on what the planning board is hearing and when. So if we're talking about cheeseburgers, then we're reserving that to be tendered towards a bill.
So
So we're talking about tractor tires, and that's when we're talking about tractor tires.
So public comments needs to be strictly to agenda items for that particular meeting.
Well, that's where this is going, but I think this is getting ready to be an example of where government gets in its own way. And that is, if there's something that's going on and the planning board needs to know about it, the public comment policy is the time that you need to tell them. And, you know, I'm probably gonna get quoted somewhere for what I'm getting ready to say, but I'm gonna say it anyway. There was a lot of time and money spent on the zoning programs in Ocala. And regardless of your position on the zoning or the efforts that went through, nobody was interested in sharing anything with this board until they seen it on the agenda. This is getting ready to happen, and bam, that drew them out. So if we put an ordinance in place or a rule or whatever you want to call it, and say, you're welcome to come over and talk to us, but we got to have it on our agenda or you can't talk to us about it, I think that's a bad idea.
Agreed.
Yes.
I think, reading over this, I think what is written is outlined fair for public hearing policy on it, but I think we should strike the public comment policy out of this particular draft. And I'll support the rest, but I think we need to draft a public comment policy separately. There we can add Mr. Cheeks' comments there. I agree that we can, you know, list out, you can comment on whatever, if that's the will and pleasure of this board. But I think for a public hearing policy, these 6 points work. For public hearing only.
Okay, so county commissioners, they have two public comment periods. They do, first public comment period is for agenda items. Then they have a general public comment period at the end of the meetings, non-agenda items. You know, cheeseburgers is on the agenda, tractor tires is not, right? Okay. And that's, we're probably trying to reinvent the wheel so much. We already kind of got a county policy. I don't know why we just don't adopt what the county commissioners already have for public comment on general meetings. And then they have a comment period for public hearings also, which is a 5-minute speaking, but they different rules apply on those, right? So, I mean,
So they're public hearings that are required statutory hearings, right? Those, they decide pretty much at the time of the meeting how long they're gonna allow people to speak, and it does kind of depend on how many's on the list or whatever else is on the agenda.
that's right.
I think the last time they dropped it to 3 minutes, but there has been times with 5 minutes.
That's right. That's right.
So I guess the question is, there's a public hearing policy here, which seems like y'all are okay with that. If there's parts of the public hearing policy that feel right to put in the regular public comment policy, that would be okay too, but maybe there's parts of it that are not.
Right.
Maybe we
Well, I think it ought to be mentioned that not every one of our meetings is a public hearing.
Right.
So having this for public hearings, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Because a public hearing is gonna have to be advertised in advance. There's a whole bunch of gears that got to mesh to make that work. But for just your regular meeting, to have a public comment policy that is what we've got now, or that cleaned up a little bit, or whatever, I think is what we cannot do our work if we don't have public input.
Well,
That's at the end of the day. We can talk about it for the next 9 years, but that fact won't change. We've got to have some public input to do our work.
best I can remember for the last 20 years, there have been, we go a whole year and not have not one public comment. And I feel like it's pretty much understanding that we are an advisory board to the commissioners. But when it gets to the point that we do not listen to the public, then even though we're just an advisory board, we're still in the public's eyes, we're still part of the it gets to the point that we do not listen to what the public has to say, we're not a democracy. that being said.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I started wanting to stay forward, and at the end of our quarterly meeting, we always have public comments from across the state. So that gives you an idea in reference to the county. And believe me, we hear.
No doubt. Well,
So I have a question if I can.
yes, ma'am.
Can we just add, can we take the draft where we have section A for public hearings? And I think the next section was on page 2 was comments prior. Can we just add something in there like another subsection of this one to talk about public meeting comments? Because I agree with a lot of the others. I don't think we can serve the people if we can't hear them. I mean, if we're not listening to them. And I do like the section B where you can submit them in email or mail or hand delivery. But I do think there are those that want to come to the podium and be heard. So could we just add another section and massage it a little bit so that we've got some framework for public comments at our meetings?
I'm assuming modifying this draft is doable.
What I would think is we had the discussion tonight, and then Patrick and I would get together and get together the language of what y'all talk about tonight and bring it back to you next month.
What is so different from the county commissioners' policies?
County commissioners policy, I believe, is being reevaluated too. So I don't know if that's something we want to stand on, but I know the county, we presented that. I don't even have it. We presented that a couple meetings ago about it, and it's got some stuff about political office. It's got the whole breaking apart into 2 sections. I think that's really being looked at. There's not a whole lot different, but there is language in there, and that y'all would want to stay away from 2 to say that certain things can't be spoken about because you're restricting your First Amendment stand. But like the vulgarity and things like that are in part of this, that would actually be fine.
That'd be Article 5. Order in the quorum required for all hearings. This requires speech to refrain from vulgar language, profanity, inappropriate gestures, insult, personal attacks, and accusations. And for speakers to be courteous and respectful during their comment time. Failure to abide by this requirement may result in full picture of the speaker's right to speak.
And this has happened in other counties, not necessarily planning board, other counties that have boards and school boards and things. I've seen on the news where there have been some disruptions and people are actually taken out and not allowed to come back and speak because it disrupts the actual functionality of the board getting their business done.
Thank you, Rod. Right here it says, thank you, sir. Let me read this. There should be no more than 3 speakers on any one topic per meeting. It is recommended that speakers desiring to speak on the same topic and advocating the same position choose one person to speak for all. Time period, 1 hour with the option to expand. And I'm assuming that's depending on 1 hour total. Depending on the number of people that speak.
So Ian's got that up on the screen. So for anybody at home, the county commissioner's public comment policies up.
Yeah, that's fair.
Gotta make this one comments. I know it's not. Y'all aren't the county commissioners. So it's not the same thing.
I think we should have 2 separate policies. That's just my opinion. One for public hearings, which is statutory required. Make sure that's in line, consistent. And I think 1 through 6 in line with statutory requirement, but I also think we should draft public comment policy just specific for this planning board. 2 separate documents. Make our comments now as far as our recommendations, what we would like to see on that public comment policy.
Well, I think it needs to say that if somebody wants to come speak to the planning board, they can. You got 3 minutes. And we would appreciate it if there were multiple people talking about the same thing, if they could tell us that information one time. And I think it needs to include not to say nothing ugly. Think that your mama's sitting there with you listening to what you say. And if you didn't want her to hear it, don't say it to us. And I think it needs to be at the tail end, the chair at the time needs to have some discretion about it. If we've got 57 things on the agenda and we need to move through this pretty quick, we ought to have the latitude to do that. If we don't have anything to do with public comments, y'all come, talk all night.
So you're talking about a time allowance for
I
discussion?
think it needs to say each person has got 3 minutes. That needs to be matter of fact. So everybody knows there's 3 minutes. But the chairman should have the discretion, if need be, to extend that. Hopefully he wouldn't have to cut it back or sheet. But I think that at the chair's discretion needs to be worked in that verbiage somewhere. That's just my thought.
I'd also, on top of that, if there were, you know, as you said, if they could somehow know that you've got multiple people that are concerned about the same subject matter, and they choose a spokesperson, that we would know that I'm speaking on behalf of 27 other people. You know, that would be important to know, not that I'm one person, but I've got me, but there's, you know, 30 more people in this room that, you know, have sent me up here to
Pretty
speak
much
for
agree.
them. Right.
Well, you know, we've had a textbook example of this a couple of times dealing with this zoning. Because the chairman has said, we appreciate hearing everything, but we only need to hear it once. And as he called down the list, somebody gets up and says, this is what I think. And 3 or 4 people or half a dozen later, you call somebody's name and they say, Mr. Chairman, what I was gonna say is what I said. Thank you.
Right.
And I think there was one night where we heard that same statement 3 or 4 times. So people know, that I just think it needs to be, that's my thinking.
In fairness, I think they all should be heard in one way or another.
Right.
What's the thoughts on being able to ask the speaker at the time of their speaking a question? Like if we didn't understand something they said, because a lot of times we wait till the end after we've heard from 45 people, may have a question that we had for the first speaker, but there's no opportunity right now currently where even being proposed where we can ask them a question. I think I see value in being able to ask them, but but to your point, I don't think we should do the back and forth from the audience. If any board members have questions, we ask it then before they leave the podium. Their time is up, but one of us had a question about something they said, we could be to ask it. Otherwise, we can't go back to it and ask them later.
Would that be where you got your commissioner or board responses? Would that be the time for that?
That's usually
Legal
at the
needs to
end.
weigh in on that.
Patrick, what's your thoughts?
That can be the time for it if you choose to do so.
The what you gotta be careful of. Somebody comes up, makes 3 minutes worth of comments. You ask them a question. Somebody else comes up, and they got about 3 minutes and 20 seconds worth of comments, and you cut them off at 3 minutes. And nobody asked them a question. And now you've got a problem where you let them talk extra and you wouldn't even let me say what I had to say. That's maybe kind of where we are. So if they ain't got a problem with it, I don't.
What I've noticed in the past sometimes when a member have massages conversation in the public, that's when chaos gets started. And that's when a lot of people will chime in. And it kind of sort of gets a little bit, we'll say, disorderly to a degree. The main position, me personally, I'm taking is the value of listening to people. That's what we're here for. I do know there's been times, and we're not naming names, but there's been times that comments get a little bit, we'll say, stirred up pretty hard. I fully understand that. If this issue that is pertaining to an individual, I can only understand their excitement. But I've noticed in this particular case, a lot of times a little bit further, sugar and spice and everything.
I guess I was just thinking, there's been several times when I've heard comments from the public, what is that? But you can't ask them. It's not allowed.
Well, I understand. But at some point, the public needs to have a warm fuzzy feeling about it too.
So question, can we adopt this public hearing part and continue to work on a public comment part? Is that what we talked about here, two different? we're in
I would
agreement?
advise against that. That would just make it choppy, and it would be a whole lot cleaner and easier if we present one singular document next time, putting all of these thoughts into it and modifications. That way it could be adopted all at the same time and on the same sheet of paper instead of having to go off of two different papers moving forward, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense to me. Thank you.
So my recommendation tonight is either to adopt the policy as you see fit, or to vote against it and give Tanya and I some instruction of how it could be improved and modified for next time, so we can bring it back instead of piecemealing. We like this, but not this, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. He's actually withdrew the motion. So we don't have to vote against that.
There's not a motion on the table at all.
Yeah.
Yep.
So without trying to, be difficult for anybody in particular, thing like it, it'd probably be just a good idea for you and Miss Tanya to massage this thing a little bit. And let's make sure, I understand the whole situation being, maybe some folks may feel like it's more streamlined to have, 30 emailed comments. I get it. But, we still need to hear from the public. We need to hear from them. I do remember the night we was over at the big courthouse. The gentleman came over and he said, you do realize that the local state law, you're not required to have public comments. And I said, I fully understand that. Thus serving the people, then their comments are very valuable to us. So I guess massage it up just a little bit, bring it up to us next time. Let's see if we can have something a little bit more comfortable for everybody.
So we're gonna have, we're gonna still have like a public hearing section and then a public comment section. You're just gonna.
It sounds like we're keeping A, keeping B, and making a C. Is that what I'm hearing? C being standard public comment section, we make that what we want it to be, so each piece is written out.
That's what I think.
All right, so the public comment period, are we gonna have one singular public comment period in a regular standard meeting?
So in your procedures piece, not as stricken right now, but the set out of the agenda is spelled out in the procedures 1 through 9, and right now number 4 is public comments. As written, that's how you would handle it. That's the things that we would have to change it in your procedure piece too.
The two public comments, one for the cheeseburgers and one for the tractor tires.
It could be for elephant riding on hot air balloon at this point. I'm not being ugly, but backing up and rephrasing.
I think we had one public comment period, but it not be restricted to agenda items. Somebody got something they want to say.
I agree.
Yeah,
Well, I'm with you.
But I'm hearing that there's some language that we want to put in that gives the chair the discretion. So if you have some kind of special meeting and we need some different procedures, that can be handled as well.
The more rigid you make it, the more inflexible it's going to be. And when the problem arises, the bigger that problem is going to be.
I have a question that might be able to help us out in drafting this. Is it possible to limit it to Rather, I suggest limiting the public comment period, not to just items on the agenda, but items that can be considered by the planning board, just to make sure that the planning board does not have public comments that come forward that are completely irrelevant to what the planning board is here to do. Does that make sense? How does the board feel about that?
That's not a bad suggestion. I kind of like it a little bit.
Just to try to keep it in your lanes that you can handle.
I like it.
That's a good idea.
There have been some meetings that I remember in my 15 years, and I know you remember this one time, where people talked about something that had nothing to do with the planning department. I remember one meeting in particular, when you told me, you said, you need to be talking to health department. The planning department gonna do this. But when we take a cumulative 40 years worth of time on this board, and can you come up with any more examples of that?
It's actually happened. I mean,
I know it's happened, but can you come with any more examples?
I do remember one time, and this has been good gracious, it's been 20 plus years ago. A guy came in here and his whole idea was coming here and trashing the health department. And this is a different health department issue. He came here trashing the health department. And I'm sitting over there and the whole time I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I work with those people every day. They're good people. So he was over here complaining. I think he was a developer of sorts. And he said, it's taking me a whole 2 weeks to get them guys to come out and evaluate my property. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, yeah, have you seen what they drive? When the sheriff's department gets down with those Chevrolet Caprices and done jump ditches and everything else, I mean, they're going down the road with fenders dragging the road. So after I didn't say nothing that night, but I remember after that particular conversation, I went over and I visited with a few different ones. And something was done about it. But there was times that people come in and they talk to us about all kinds of stuff. I'm just waiting for somebody to come in, expecting us to cut them checks so they can have a flying rattlesnake chicken farm. So there's been a lot.
So aside from that, can you think of any other examples of where somebody's talked to us about something that was just totally out of our purview?
Yes.
You can.
I can.
How many?
Several. I would say
50?
if I just based on my memory, and I can't remember everything, I'd say at least a couple of dozen.
Okay, 24, that's one a year for you. Can anybody else on this board think of a time when somebody's come in here and shared something with us that we had nothing to do with? Had nothing to do with us. Totally out of our purview.
I've only been on a few months, but I can't call.
Where I'm going with this is, if we write this up, then it's gonna be perceived by the people who read it. Because they ain't sitting here listening to this discussion, I was like, we can go over and talk to them. They don't want to hear from us. That's what I'm saying, if we make this too rigid.
And we can include that language in there just to get that point across on paper to those that are not attending this meeting tonight. It can say that the board will have a public comment period during its regular meetings monthly, but the public comment period or the public comments need to be limited to items that the planning board can decide on and make recommendations on. I think that would get that point across and not be too rigid and be common sense even.
Well, I'm agreeing with the common sense part, but I hesitate to depend on it. Well, we're gonna put a list of what planning board can and can't do to go with it, so folks will know before they come up here. You see,
So I think some of the things I'm hearing.
Seeing this stuff this way.
No, I agree with you. I think it needs to be open to them to make comments.
Okay.
And I think some of the things you're talking about that have happened, some of this was prior to me, was people didn't realize maybe what planning board actually has purview to, so they wouldn't know that that wasn't something that was in y'all's realm. But there is this is not a planning board issue, why are you wasting our time?
Tanya, on their sign-up sheet, could there be a space provided, they could maybe put a brief on it, what they want to speak on?
Well, sure, that's actually not in any of this, we can make that change without a official
You know,
change.
Wouldn't that be elaborate, just to know, and then we look at it and you know if you got several repetitions on.
That's a good idea, because then we know different between cheeseburger tractors and.
I think that they do that, the county commissioner, don't they have a?
They have a segment, a place now, yeah.
Yeah.
That's how they're determining who's speaking at what time.
Mr. Chair, one other comment, do we know, I know Ms. Tanya mentioned that there are certain things that would require a public hearing. But I'm not sure I know, and probably the public don't know what would constitute a public hearing for planning board. Would that language be added to this as well, so it can be, I guess, outline what would constitute public hearing versus not?
Do you want to take that one, Patrick?
Yeah, so if you could pull up the draft policy that we have tonight that we're discussing, and it'll be useful. So if we look at the first paragraph, we explain what public hearing is. And the second line, it says during a statutorily required public hearing, and then shorten it to say hearing. That shortening might cause some individuals some confusion. So maybe moving forward, we keep that highlighted language of statutorily required public hearing, just to kind of give it a little bit more emphasis on the, formality of it, if you will.
And just for that, if you need to, what he's talking about, the statutorily required, most things that y'all are going to hear is a public hearing is when you're the decision-making board. It stops with you kind of thing.
I guess that's what my question was,
Yeah.
what is statutory required in planning board? I know.
So
there's a
our
lot
solar
more
ordinance,
Certain kinds of
yeah, our
permits.
solar ordinance has given planning board the authority to make the decision.
Rod, in your 15 years, how many times we have public hearings? That you can remember?
3 or 4, maybe.
In 15 years.
Right.
So it's rare that we have public hearings in both places.
And maybe half a dozen, but it's not a common occurrence.
That's what I was thinking.
Because the public hearing is where you got to start off by reading that disclaimer
That's right.
and calling it into public session or public something.
You're opening a public hearing and all that, closing out. And most of what y'all do is an advisory board, so you're mostly sending your recommendation to the board of commissioners and they hold the public hearing.
I fully understand, but it still backs up to what we were talking about earlier as far as being able to have input from the
I would hesitate, Anthony, in actually putting specific items in there, because if we write something or something changes by state law, then we have to come back and change all this stuff too. That's my only hesitation.
It needs to be fairly broad and not so restrictive. I think that's what you're trying to say. And that's what I'm trying to say.
Motion on this for not accepting this or whatever.
Well, no, he made a motion, but he's rescinded. So what we're gonna do is give staff some direction, let them come back next and then do one motion on the whole thing.
massage it up some.
So that it's not piecemeal in the book. It all goes in there one time.
Agreed.
And if that is the intention, formality reasons, it would be best to hear a motion to lay the item on the table so we can pick it up next meeting rather than just let it sit tonight, if that makes sense.
Second.
Got a motion to second. All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries.
I,
Thank you, Mr. Graves.
That's that rural internet delay that she's messing with. That's the big
Well, you
one
guys
there.
can go back.
That's all right.
You basically asked me to send it back.
Just an abstract idea can't be laid on the table.
Ms. Tanya, is there any announcements or discussion about anything else we need to be concerned about this evening?
Yeah, staff has some announcements.
Everybody happy? Everybody good?
We do have one more item on the agenda that is on the screen right now. So as Tanya explained, there was 3 different issues we had to tackle tonight, with one being tabled. That would also table the second one, being the changes to the policy. Now, what is in front of you is the third change. That would be a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners to make the slight changes from mentioning of chapter 153A to 160D, where everything has been consolidated and parked under. So if we can just tackle that real quick before adjourning.
Yes.
I move that we accept the changes recommended and for to come to this report.
Second. Discussion needed. We have a motion and a second on the board. All those in favor, signify with aye. Thank you, Ms. Graves. This time, to pretty much wrap it up.
For me, it does.
Patrick, we good?
We're good. Thank everyone for the comments tonight. It's very helpful.
Thanks for coming to visit with us.
Motion to adjourn the meeting. Second.